Miletus was a great seafaring power. Her colonies surrounded the shores of the Black Sea. She founded the first Greek settlements in Egypt. There is evidence that the temperament of the Melanesians, as of all the Ionian Greeks, was in every way adventurous, exploratory, and individualistic. I pause for just 1 second here to say I have studied in minor detail the roots of Greek culture and the roots of Mycenaean culture in the culture of ancient Crete and Knossos, K-N-O-S-S-O-S-S. And that's interesting. That is very interesting. I'll just note one thing here. I mean, it's a whole subject to be explored by itself, but the women, for example, wore bodices that came up to right here, and the breasts were worn out front, nipples exposed. They had festivals where they would have a person in the ring with a bowl. The bull would run towards them, and they're supposed to grab the horns and vault up over the bull. Probably not too many successful instances, I don't know. This is the culture where we get the idea of the Minotaur at the center, the Minotaur at the center of the labyrinth, the maze. The Palace of Knossos was supposed to be the center of that, or was supposed to have that labyrinth in its basement or something like that. Fascinating culture. Anyways, that's an issue to be discussed on its own. Even this early Ionian Greek culture was in every way, quote, adventurous, exploratory, and individualistic. The very limited information of value which we possess about Thales of Miletus comes to us from a few references in Herodotus and Aristotle. Herodotus tells us that Thales proposed a plan for a federation of the Ionian states with its capital at Teos, T-E-O-S. A sensible idea like this seems more characteristic of these early thinkers, many of whom were actively engaged in politics, than does the later anecdote. Here's the later anecdote, which I've mentioned before and couldn't remember who or where I'd heard this, and here it is. The later anecdote of Thales falling into a well. I had heard he fell into a ditch, because he was so occupied with looking at the stars. The philosopher or intellectual so concerned with the sky that he doesn't know what's going on Earth. Only the Greeks could give you such a potent fable, you know. Philosophers were not regarded as being odd and unpractical eccentrics until the time of Aristophanes. Maybe we should do a play of Aristophanes a bit later. That would be interesting, because he's a comedian for sure. The clouds, the frogs, different ones. Herodotus also tells us that Thales successfully predicted an eclipse, which was visible in Asia Minor in May 585 BC. However, as his successor, as leader of thought in Miletus, Anaximander was certainly ignorant of the true cause of eclipses, we may assume that Thales was also ignorant and was merely applying the rule of thumb methods which had long been practiced in Babylonia. Now, they weren't sure, you know how an eclipse is. Well, there's a couple possible ones. The moon can come in between us and the sun. So here it is, the middle of the day, there comes the moon, and it passes over the sun. Not every spot on the earth necessarily sees that, because the shadow of that, for some people, the moon might just partially pass over the sun, or might just go below or above it, or next to it, whatever. Won't go right over top of it. Depends on where the shadow of the moon passes across the Earth's surface. However, it's a different story when the Earth passes in front of the moon. Then everybody who can see the moon is able to see the eclipse. They didn't quite understand exactly how and why eclipses happened. They weren't sure exactly what was going on, but they had rules of thumb, predicted these things. The Babylonians, we're going to learn a bit about Babylonia and Assyria later, but the Babylonians just recorded the stars and the rising and setting of the stars in different constellations for centuries. They just recorded it because they thought they were messages from the gods. So the Babylonians had very detailed astronomical records going back centuries. Now they didn't know what the hell to do with them. They were writing down messages from the gods. The Greeks got hold of this, and indeed this is held to be one of the roots of Greek rationality. The fact that they studied this and they started saying, well, there's a cause and effect relationship here. This is natural. There's something natural going on. This isn't the stars are not gods. The stars are objects acting in accordance with their nature. But let us continue. So he predicted it, but didn't know why exactly it happened. Aristotle indeed attributes to him the saying, quote, all things are full of gods, and that the magnet is alive since it has the power to move iron. But these may or may not be attributions. They may actually be what he said, they may not be what he said. We are left with the other statement attributed to Thales by Aristotle. That is the fundamental substance from which all things proceed is water. How he arrived at this doctrine we do not know. What is really important is that the doctrine should have been expressed at all, that a man should have assumed the existence of a coherent universe, and should have looked for one underlying reality as a substratum or cause for everything, including the gods, remember. There is a sense, as was suggested by Lucretius, in which it would be true to say that the distance between Thales and a modern atomic physicist, the difference between Thales and a modern physicist, is less great than the distance between Thales and the whole history of civilization before him. So Thales was very modern in some certain sense. Alright, done with Thales of Miletus. We go on to Anaximander. Anaximander, born in about 610 BC. Anaximander was the first Greek to write a book in prose. This book, although now lost, was available for a time to later philosophers. It is quite frequently referred to, and its actual language is sometimes quoted. Those references, which have most relevance to Anaximander's general and original view of the problem, which have been raised by Thales, are as follows. He's got 5 points. We're going to read 1, 2, and 4, because the others are archaic and bizarre. Anaximander of Miletus, son of Praxiades, a fellow citizen and associate of Thales, said that the material cause and first element of things was the infinite, he being the first to introduce this name of the material cause. He said it is neither water nor any other of the so-called elements, but a substance different from them which is infinite, from which arise all the heavens and the worlds within them. Now the only thing he could be talking about from a modern scientific standpoint, and this is he was rationalistically just going off. There's no significance to the things he said. But insofar as he's correct, the only substance that would meet these qualifications would be energy. And infinity, well, I mean, he couldn't grasp the size of, if he were to try to grasp the size of our solar system, he would have been astounded and fallen over on his ear. But for him to grasp the size of the universe, 13.2 billion years old, and therefore 26 billion light years across, he wouldn't even be able to fathom. So, for all intents and purposes, infinite. Only energy could meet that qualification, though. And energy is not infinite. Infinite is a non-metaphysical. It is an epistemological concept. A non-metaphysical concept, it is an epistemological concept. To say there's no limit to the number. He says that this is eternal and ageless, and that it encompasses all of the worlds. That's interesting. They set even bigger parameters to reality than I mean,